you might have been hearing a lot about financial management or FinOps, right? So today we are going to discuss about the costing mechanisms, the pricing, that how AWS strategize their products, and then how we can efficiently manage the billing. So overall, it's all about money, right? I mean, not everything is money, but we do business to get better in it and then earn money out of it, right? So we are going to discuss about money and cloud financial management. So on premises, on your own data center, financial management is slightly or very different from how cloud operates. The reason is on the premises, as we discussed on the very first day, the model of the financial management on the data center on the premises is capital expenditure model. So we have to understand what exactly we need to run our business and what kind of equipments we need, what kind of technology, tools, licensing, subscriptions, and whatever, right? So whatever we need, we go and buy it upfront. So we have to invest upfront. So there, the financial management team, the finance team, they have a very good clarity on how the forecast is and what kind of things are needed by each and every department, business unit, and where exactly is the profit and loss. The P&L is pretty much clear for the finance team. Whereas when it comes to cloud, we understood that the model has changed. So we have traded the capital expenditure model into operational expenditure model. So operational expenditure is completely a different model. So there are ways to kind of efficiently use this model, but there are pros and cons. There are a lot of nitty-gritty details that you need to be aware of on how to optimize the cloud spend, optimize the cloud cost on public cloud platform, especially AWS, which we are discussing now, right? So operational expenses, operational expenditure is the run and maintenance cost, the operational cost. So here it's not upfront payment. We are paying as per consumption, pay as per you go model, right? So pay as per you go model is the model that we have in the cloud environment, pay as per consumption or pay as per you go model. So financial management team, the finance team is pretty much heavily dependent on the operations team, the operations manager, the operations lead, the operations team, right? So that's where they have to work hand in hand, like how the DevOps team have emerged, right? So the development team and operations team are now closely working as a one single team, so that they know what's happening and how they can improvise the development, how they can improvise the continuous delivery of features to the product, to the application. So development team has started working closely with operations team to improvise on the development related features. So here, the finance team has joined hands with the operations team to ensure that they have a proper optimization strategy, have a proper closer look at what's happening on the environment. So if the environment is pretty large, if there is a lot of dynamic changes on the environment, if you are creating too many things very frequently, like if you are spinning up 10-15 servers every week and creating a couple of databases here and there, and then if there is a lot of changes happening to your environment, so of course you need to have a very regular cadence, very regular meeting with the respective stakeholders, respective team. It can be application owners, business owners, the cloud operations lead, the cloud operations team. So there are certain roles who are taking care of it. So sometimes you might have a cloud SME, or you might have a cloud technical lead, CTL role, or maybe account technical lead role. So there might be different role or different naming for that particular role in different organization, but their responsibility is to look at the cost very closely and do the FinOps management. So the person should have a kind of good finance understanding, and then he also need to understand the technical importance of these services, so he does not end up going and making a lot of changes. See, I've seen people or organization creating FinOps team capability, and then they start doing a lot of things, and then they might end up getting into downtime when they go and touch some instances which is rarely used, or maybe like some instances might be kept stopped for certain reasons, maybe like they might be using it once in a month or once in a quarterly during finance cycle or whatever, right? And then at times they will go and look at the last 2 weeks report, 1 month report, and then they will decommission the instance, or they will delete a certain content which they feel it is not being actively used and all, right? So there has to be a very good proper capability when strategy that the capability should follow. FinOps is not a very easy thing to start with, but once we put things into place, once we have the right approach, the right strategy, then I think this will eventually evolve. And FinOps is not just one time activity, right? So cloud operations is what we do on a regular basis, right? As a cloud operations engineer, we do patching every month, we do monitoring daily every minute, and then we do backup of our instance as per the customer requirement every hour or every day, and so on. And then this the cloud operations is a routine thing. And then similarly, the DevOps, new features are needed by the customer, we go and add functionalities, we go and continuously integrate and deploy the new features onto your application. So DevOps is again a regular culture. So all these cloud ops, DevOps, and FinOps, these are all regular thing. Okay, it's not going to be one time setup and then leave it. It's not like that. You have to continuously evolve. There will be improvement, there will be a lot of new options coming up there. The cloud is continuously evolving. Day by day you are getting new features, new updates, new functionalities, so you need to be on top of it, and then help customers eventually use all these options, and then benefit from the model, the capex opex model in the public cloud. Okay, so capex model is different. The finance team approves prior to the purchase, prior to the procurement, whereas on the cloud, the operations team, the business owner, the application owner, they have the rights to go and purchase certain things. But of course, like some organization, they want to discuss it, they want to get some approval before going and availing particular subscription or license or particular product. But there are gaps, or there are certain areas, risks, where team can go and spin up something which is of very high cost, and then they might not have done the due diligence checks. Okay, so in order to control, in order to optimize things, we need to have a very good approach strategy. That is what we are going to discuss today. Okay, so FinOps is very, very important, and there are certifications separately on FinOps itself. So if you want to be a FinOps, this role is also kind of much needed nowadays, because many customers have come to the cloud, and they want someone to guide them properly around the cost optimization. So as a solutions architect, if you are providing all the needed support, then organizations but might get better with your guidance and support. Okay, so with pay as you go approach, there is a lot of services. So AWS, as you know, they offer more than 225 plus services is what they are offering on date, and then out of which 50 plus services are very commonly used on many of the use cases, like what we have been discussing, right? The EC2, the S3, the Elastic Beanstalk, and other services. So those are all kind of 50 plus services are very effectively used in many of the use cases. So that is something which we need to be thorough about. But there are other services. Some organization, for some of the use cases it might fit, but it is not that every organization will use all these offering or services. So they are using as per their need, and then they are utilizing based on the use cases and the customer requirement. So we are going and paying as per the consumption, pay as per you go, pay as per you consume, or utilize model. So this is the base model. So this is something the financial operations team, they know it, and there are certain strategy that you can think about. There are a lot of drivers towards the cost. I would say the fundamental drivers for the cost. Right, I will explain. There are three fundamental drivers for the cost. I'll come to that. But before that, when it comes to cloud, there is no long-term contract. There is no long-term commitment unless you go and commit to certain services. For example, if you're going and consuming Glacier, then you are committing that you are going to store the data for at least bare minimum of 180 days. Or if you're going and using reserving certain things, you are contractually obligated to go and run your instance for 1 year or 3 year based on the contract. So if you're going for reservation, savings plan, or if you are going and using services which are for retention purposes and policies, then yeah, there comes a contractual obligation there. But in general, there you don't have to be really obligation. I mean, you don't, there is no real need to go and contractually commit anything for long term, unless the business is looking for that option for cost savings, or for business retention policy requirement or something similar to that. So AWS pricing is pretty much similar to how the other cloud vendor works. And as a beginner to cloud, or as a layman, you can compare it with how you are working with your utilities, right? Like how you are consuming the water, electricity, and then at the end of the month or end of 2 months, you get a consumption bill, and then based on that bill, you are going and paying for that particular stuff. And there is no um, uh, charges for like, let's say, if you are breaking the contract with AWS, so there is no additional cost for termination of the contract or services. So you can just go ahead and stop the system, if you don't want that EC2 instance, or if you don't want that particular S3 bucket, you can go and delete it or terminate it immediately, and there is no additional hidden charges or cost associated with that. And very important thing, so you need to, as a project manager or as a solutions architect, your primary job is not to over provision something, or over position something, or you should not miss the important capacity that the business is needing. So you have to think about different dimensions. So I mean, most of the times I would say, if it is a new application, we might not know how much CPU memory, how much storage it needs. So we rely upon the application owners, business owners, to guide us or tell us how many users might connect and how much consumption might be there. So we go with a rough order of magnitude of estimation in terms of the resourcing. But then after 2 weeks or after 1 month, based on the consumption report, like using the monitoring tool like CloudWatch, or the usage report, so you can get to understand how much CPU is being used, how much memory is being consumed, how much storage is kind of day by day growth is there. So based on that, you can go and plan the capacity provisioning, and the capacity planning can be done. So in cloud, so there are risks of over provisioning. So we might go and provision something which is not really needed. See, this especially in the cloud, there are risks, but then compared to your on premises, the risk is very less. See, in on the premises, see, if you go and procure something upfront, that resource is being idle, right? So I mean, for example, if you feel first year you might have 1,000 users, second year you might have 1,500, third year you might have a total of 3,000 users, something like that. So when you go and purchase the device, when you go and purchase the hardware, you always go and purchase it for the highest consumption model, right? So you have to purchase it for the 3,000 users facility. Like the server should have the potential to manage those 3,000 user connections, or whatever the amount of processing that the particular business is looking for. So you cannot go and purchase it for the lesser capacity. But in cloud, you can definitely purchase it for the current need, the first 1 year need, the first 2 years need. So you need not you need not plan for the next 3 years or next 5 years, unlike your on premises. In on premises, when you go and purchase something, you are purchasing it for the next 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years down the line. So you are wasting a lot of resources and keeping it on your data center. If your business is performing exceptionally well, then you might reap the benefit after 1 year or 2 year, or after the completion of 5 years. You might get the benefit if your business went in the right approach, or went in the right direction as per your intentions and your plan. But in cloud, okay, I would say the cloud reduces the risks of over provisioning, because we are not over provisioning anything at the beginning. So we are going and creating systems with a kind of general purpose or minimal need, and then we are not also over positioning it. We are not also going and creating instances of very high size. We are starting with general purpose, and then based on the capacity, and then based on the need, we go and convert it or change it or increase the size based on the consumption and the monitoring and the pattern that we see on those resources. So you can adapt to your business depending on the need and not on the forecast. So business owner might see different forecast, might assume something different, but then you are going and creating something which is of real need. Okay, so we are modeling on the real need. We are looking at the ground usage, and then we are doing it, not the forecast. So forecast might be like, people will say like, I might get this many users, this many connections, so we might need to have this big server and all. And sometimes, like, yeah, so business might perform beyond expectation, and sometimes like it might not, it might take its own time to shape up and then get the number of users we are trying to achieve. So here we are adopting based on the business current real need, okay, not on the forecast. So you can improve your responsiveness to changes, right? In cloud, so business might need more capacity next day, more sizing the next day, so you are going and provisioning or adding resources very quickly here. So you can make quick changes, quick updates, quick capacity upgrades and so on, whereas on the premises this is not feasible, right? You have to go for the finance team approval, get their budget, go and place the procurement, and order has to be processed. So PO processes itself takes 2 or 3 days, and then the device has to be shipped, and then it has to be racked, stacked, and all those things on the data center, and then it comes for your consumption. So whereas on the cloud, it's everything virtual. So we are logically expanding things, logically creating things. So it's like the responsiveness to change is very, very high. Okay, so very improvised responsiveness to changes. So if you want more resources, you get it immediately. It's on the fly. It's, I mean, that's what we always mention, on demand resourcing, right? You get it anytime, any kind of sizing or any resources you want. On demand is what cloud is famous for. And there are certain services like you can say relational database services or EC2. You can go and invest in reservations, capacity planning, and so on. But that is slightly different from the terms that we are talking about. So there are in public cloud also, you have options to go and commit for a longer term contract. Okay, so that is through the reservations, that you can go and purchase the reserved instances, or you can go and purchase the savings plan. You can go and configure long-term retention policies for your storage, and then put them into Glacier Archive and so on. So there are certain options where if the business is really needing a contract, it's not the provider who is pushing this, right? So it's the consumer. You are feeling like going for a 3-year relationship with AWS is going to help me save 55% of the cost, or 60% of the cost. So they realize the benefit, they understand what we are getting from the committing strategies like the reservation, savings plan, and going and configuring long-term retention. This is going to help them save a lot of costs, and it's the consumer decision, not the provider who is insisting in it. But provider is providing options to go and have a long-term relationship commitment with them, and then this helps you to save a lot of cost. So now coming to before going into the fundamental drivers of cost, I will share some pre-words, right? So cloud is pay as you go approach for vast majority of AWS services. Not all 225 services have the same approach or model. So the approach and model is slightly different from one another. For example, the EC2 pricing is different from slightly different from storage pricing. Storage pricing is slightly different from database pricing. There is a small difference, but it's not completely vastly different. But there is a difference in vast majority of services that we are using. So the pay-as-you-go model works per service. So each and every service has got its own costing model, its own licensing options. It has got its own long-term commitment option. So in cloud, if you turn off the resources, you don't have to pay for them. If you're terminating the resources, you don't have to pay for them. But there is a hidden cost around the, not hidden cost. It's like okay, let me uh, start typing it here. So there are, at a very, very high level, there are three major charges that you can see that makes up the cost, right, for the customer: compute, storage, and network. So some people will feel like if I go and turn off the EC2 instance, I might not get any kind of cost. That is not the case. So you will have to pay for the storage. You are consuming around, maybe if you have two volumes, one for OS volume and one for your data volume. So you are consuming like approximately 100 GB for your OS and then 200 GB for your application. So you have to pay for the 300 GB irrespective of your instances running or not, right? So if you turn off your resources, you don't have to pay for the compute resource because there is no compute activity, there is no CPU memory usage, and there is no network data transaction because it's not actively used by the customers. But if you have storage content stored in your storage, and then if you have replication configured from one storage to another storage for backup purposes or between regions for disaster recovery and so on, so you have to pay for the replication cost, you have to pay for the storage cost. So there are costs that you need to be aware of, right? So people assume that if you turn off the resources, the complete billing stop. It's not like that. So there are certain other charges like storage costs, replication costs, backup cost. So all these things have to be factored, have to be clearly discussed out. So there are no upfront charges, but you have to be clear on what you are choosing from. So if you're going for lock-in period, then you also need to be you need to have a proper understanding. If you are going and terminating the contract early, so there is a early termination charges for your contract, right? And people call it as what you call pro rata charges. So if you are having some loans with a different bank, they use this term pro rata charges. So if you are going and doing early closure of your loan commitment with the bank, they have a pro rata charge. Similarly, cloud also has a kind of contractual obligation or contract that if you want to close it upfront, or if you want to do early termination or early deletion of those content that you are storing in your storage, so you have to pay extra for that, right? So it's not the exact full amount for the next 2 years. It will be a kind of pro rata charge. They have some mechanism to calculate on how much you have to pay for that early termination. So if you have went for 3 years contract, and if you are closing the contract by 2 years, so next 1 year, you need not pay for the complete resource cost and all, but there is a kind of charging mechanism that they call it as early termination charges or pro rata charges for certain services. And some certain services, they call it as you are deleting the content early, so you have to pay for the early deletion charges. So there is a stuff associated with the long-term commitments which you need to be aware of. So volume discounts are also available in AWS. For example, if you are going for bulk migration, let's say I'm planning to migrate let's say 1,000 servers, and then if you go and tell AWS, I'm planning to migrate certain amount of servers for a particular customer, which is a huge volume, and then this is going to give you a lot of pricing year on year or month on month for AWS, because at the end, AWS is going to get the long-term benefit. So what they have is like they have programs like migration acceleration program, and there are a lot of other similar programs through which they provide the service provider or the customers with some discounts or with some credits which they can use for experimentation, or which they can use for actual migration, and they can feel confident of running their services on AWS platform. So these kind of acceleration programs helps customer with a lot of credit now. And is there a question? Okay, sorry. Okay, so there are a lot of discount programs that are available. So if you want to get some credits and discounts from AWS, you can talk to them upfront before doing any large-scale migrations or large-scale modernization activities. They also support the customers with not just technical skills; they also provide some funds, credits. So that way, it is helping us with quickly migrating the stuffs and so on. So now coming to the fundamental cost, the three fundamental costs, right? Compute, the storage, and the network. So with compute, we are referring to the CPU, the instance type, the memory, and all those stuff. And then the storage, there are two different things. Storage is the actual data that you are storing, right? And then it also refers to the replication charges are there, or we can call it as data transfer charges. If you are continuously copying the data into a different region or a different availability zone for specific requirement, high availability or disaster recovery or business continuity need, you have to pay for it. And again, there is another thing. What was that? So storage, data storing, replication, and then yeah, data transfer out is what I was supposed to. Yeah, so these are all charges which we need to be keep in mind. And for the network, yeah, so it is on the Elastic IP that. If you're going and purchasing a public IP address or elastic IP address, I think starting February this year, okay, so there has been charges for all the public IP address. Before that, the public IP address was free of cost. So from this year, February 2024, the public IP also started getting charged, but it's not a big charge. It is like 0.005 dollars per IP is what they have started billing. But earlier, prior to this, so public IP address were free of cost. And okay, but if you're going for purchasing an elastic IP address, it is a reserved IP address, and you go and attach it to an EC2 instance, the pricing will be part of your EC2 instance. But if you have purchased the elastic IP address and you have not used it anywhere in EC2 or load balancer or any of the services, then you have to pay for the elastic IP address separately. If you have attached it, then it is part of that particular resource which is consuming that elastic IP. But if you are not attached it, then there is a separate charge for the elastic IP. So at a very high level, okay, so see, I have used a word called data transfer. So AWS or any cloud provider for that matter, including Microsoft Azure or GCP, for the data transfer in, okay, the inbound data transfer, the ingress data transfer, this is free of cost. Okay, but then you can see they're happy to host your data. Okay, so that's the reason they are accepting all the data that comes into their data center free of cost. There is no inbound data transfer. Ideally, for the customer, they're already paying for the internet transfer. So if you're using the ISP provider's connection to upload the data to AWS, you are paying for the internet provider. See, for the customer, for the end customer, there are charges, but AWS does not charge for the inbound data transfer. That is something you need to keep in mind. But there are cases where if you are transferring the data between the regions, right? The outbound, the egress are chargeable case to case. Okay, so if you are transferring out of a region between region, it is always chargeable. But there are certain services where within inside the region also between availability zone, case to case it is chargeable. Okay, so it's not all the services are chargeable within the data within the region, but there are certain services, for example, database replication at the RDS level, you will see some cost for the replication even between the availability zones. But general storage data copy between the availability zones might not cost you. So it is on case to case within the region, but between region, if you want to enable DR at the regional level or business continuity at the regional level, and if you are transferring data out to internet, let's say you are transferring data out to internet, then of course there is a lot of charge. So for each 1 terabyte, I think there might be somewhere around let's say $9 or something like that. So out to internet is always chargeable. So you have to pay a hefty of amount for each GB. You might have some kind of pricing. So that is where the customers will get a lot of bill. Okay, so if you are transferring the data, if you're copying the data from AWS to your own data center, or if you're sending it to some other provider's data center, or if you are downloading the data, so if you're taking the data out of AWS to your own data center or somewhere else, then that is kind of completely chargeable. So you have to be aware of that. So out to internet is chargeable. Even as I said, out of a region, outside of a region is also uh, chargeable. So aggregation is definitely there. So they are going to charge you on the outbound data transfer with an aggregation concept across services. So outbound data transfer, you will see a bill, but that bill might not be specific for one single service. Sometimes they might say using EC2, using RDS. So you have transferred this much, and then they will say this is the aggregated data transfer out, and then they will give you the purchase, I mean the bill across services. But if you want to get the detailed split up, they provide you. Okay, it's available for the consumers to understand where exactly which service has consumed how much outbound data transfer. That will be available. But most of the cases, the outbound data transfer cost comes as an aggregation cost across multiple services. So people might get slightly confused here, but it is the data is available. So if you go and drill down, you will be able to find out which service has used it. So there are different services with different consuming model or pricing model. So I will come to the I mean, I'm still discussing on the fundamental concept only. So here on the compute, so certain services, let's say EC2, right? EC2 is a per second billing. So for the first minute, you will get the bill completely. The first minute, either like if you're using 30 second or 40 second, for the first minute it is the first 1 minute billing is the 60 second is a minimum. Okay, so the billing starts from 60 second as a minimum. If you spun up the instance, so minimum you have to pay for that 60 second, and after that 60 second it is all per second billing. So you have to keep this in mind. It's a 1 second increment even on the billing also. And then the very first minute, it's a 60 second, the per second increment is after the 60 second minimum. So similarly, like if you are storing some data, it is per GB capacity. And similarly on the data transfer, it is again per GB. And if you are using some technology like VPN that we discussed yesterday. So for encryption and IP masking, there will be some additional transaction charges, or for performing that masking and encryption, there is a overhead, right? So for that overhead, you might have to pay for using that VPN gateway or the VPN solution. So for instances, it is per second billing after the 60 second, the first 1 minute is completely chargeable. If you spun up the instance, 1 minute is applicable, and after that 1 minute it is per second billing. For your storage, it is like per GB, um, and for the network it is again per GB data transfer cost, plus it might be based on the other additional functionalities like encryption or additional gateway charges might be applicable based on what you are utilizing in between to process certain things, to do compression or encryption and so on. So these are the three fundamental costs to cost in any cloud. Okay, so this is I'm talking more on the AWS side, but this is applicable for even Microsoft Azure and GCP. So before we get into the other areas, so any questions so far? This is the basic financial management in AWS at a very, very high level. I know you guys had some questions before. I think during the EC2 and other discussions, you had some questions, but I think I'm slightly clarifying those things now. So you'll get to understand more and more on these. So any questions before I move on?